Okay, this is a demonstration on how to paint rocks. I had several students wanting to know about strokes, so I'm going to try and include that part here, which is why I started the video where I did. I'm going to start with, I just started sketching and then coming in and covering. So, I'm back to what I've always used. I'm using white, cadmium yellow pale, cadmium scarlet or cad red light, alizarin crimson, French ultramarine blue, my fake cerulean, it's put out by De La Rowney, yellow ochre, it's also put out by De La Rowney, and then I do have a burnt sienna here. I did put a little phthalo blue on here. Notice I put it away from my other color so I know that it's phthalo because it's very strong, and if you're a beginner you should not be using it. And this is a little bit of cad red light. It looks a lot like my cad scarlet, but it's a student grade of the paint, and it's not got as much pigment as that does. So I'm just using my blue, and I'll just take a little bit of this to make sort of a brownish blue, a bluish brown. And I'm going to talk about this, the way you're holding the brush. I'm holding the brush like a baton. It's way back here in my hand. And for me, I like to tuck the end of the brush into my palm because it helps support the brush. It would be probably a bit better to be like this. That's more of a baton stroke. But for me, this helps me take the weight of the brush. There's only about 3 ways to hold the brush. There's the baton grip. There is a pencil grip for detail. We do that at the end if you have a little thing to come into. There's sort of this overhand grip that helps you lay down paint a little flatter. And then some people talk about a pencil grip at the end. So you can see a pencil grip at the end gives you more room here than a pencil grip up here does. Hope everyone can see that. Pencil grip at the end, a pencil grip at the end will give you a little more movement. I much prefer the baton grip for most of my painting. Also, when I'm mixing this, I'm just putting it on very lightly. I'm using the side of my brush. I'm just figuring out where things are dark. And again, that's a reference. This is a painting. I'm just talking about rocks. So it's not overly important that everything is 100% like it looks there. It just needs to be close. This is sort of dark over here, so I'm just going to paint it dark. I'm using very little paint. I'm moving the paint around a lot. I'm just trying to get the canvas covered. I'm trying to get the canvas covered because of 2 reasons. Well, I didn't treat this canvas, so it will make the canvas easier to paint on. It's like putting that single coat on. The next coat just comes on more easily. And it's also easier to tell your shapes. You want to stay in the idea of making big, solid shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of not talk while I do this. I'm going to get the dark in, and I'm going to remind you that if you get too much paint on this in this process, feel free to take a paper towel and wipe off the excess. Me, I'm just going to take the paint and push it around till I get on there what I need. You might notice that I'm rotating my brush as I do this. So I'm using one side of my brush. I'm not pushing very hard. I know you can hear it. But I'm actually not pushing particularly hard. I'm just sort of mushing around the extra paint, getting that nice thin first coat on my canvas. Again, I didn't treat the canvas. I didn't put any gesso on it. So it's taking a little bit to make the paint go on. Just patient. Be patient. It helps you to be patient. Use a little bit of turpenoid or Gamsol. I'm just using paint plus a little bit of liquid. I'm going to pause and get the rest of this colored in and come back and start the painting from there. Okay, I've blocked this in. I want you to notice that by mixing my paint vertically, that I never really got past about halfway down my brush, and that I made big solid areas of light and dark, that I came back in and used a paper towel so that if I needed to lighten an area like here so I could see it apart from the other one, I could lighten an area in here. I just went ahead and used a paper towel so I could discern the shapes. I also, and you can see this, let me wipe off the excess paint. I also went bluer here and then more red there so that you can actually see the shapes. You can tell one shape from the other. You don't have to figure it out. I see this shape's a little off, but again, they're just rocks. Not one of you knows where I took this picture, so just make them look like rocks, okay? Just see if you can follow the shapes. I mean, I do see a little light out there, and we can put that out there. And if you need to get a little light in a spot, you can use your turp or your liquid. I would advise against bringing in white, okay? Because white takes a long time to dry, and this will set up quite rapidly. So if you need to come back in and let it dry for 20 minutes, you can, and then paint on it. So I advise against adding any white. I would just use the white of the board and a color. Like I said, I use the French ultramarine blue and the cadmium scarlet or the cad red light to mix and make different colors, bluish or brownish, and to separate them. Okay, I'm back. I took about a 15-20 minute break, and like I said, this is now dry, so it's very easy to paint on top of. I'm going to paint background to foreground, and I'm going to talk about painting the rocks as we go. I'm going to use a large flat. If I run out of flats, I'll just move into filberts. I seem to have more filberts than flats right now for whatever reason. Okay, as before, I'll try and keep my brushes separate so that you can see the different colors. I'm going to start, and it's pretty dark back here. I think I can leave that. I noticed that there's some light in here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the blue that I used and the red that I was using, French ultramarine blue and cadmium scarlet, a little bit of liquid. I like my drying medium. I like my paint to flow a little bit. I'm going to come in and I'm going to pull in some white. I want to remind you that on the reference, this is overexposed, and this is probably a little darker than it should be back there. I just went ahead and used the two colors I used to paint with. I ended up with this very violet color. So it's a little too violet for me. It's a little too red. I want to be a little bluer back in here in a couple of these areas. So I'm going to bring more blue in. This blue has a very red tinge to it. So I am going to go ahead and use a little cerulean. Each time you mix, your paint gets darker. So now when it gets darker, I'm going to add some white so it gets lighter. I'm going to look at the color. Again, this is very violet. What I'm looking at there is a whole lot grayer. What's the complement to violet? The complement is yellow, So I'm going to use this yellow ochre. Notice I didn't mix in the same pile. I moved to the side. I'll move some back in. There we go. Again, every time you mix, it gets a little darker. I'm going to add a little more white, keeping my brush fairly vertical. And there's the load on my brush. Let me test it. A little color in there. That sort of fits this color over here. Maybe some of this. So I'll use it a little bit. It's a touch green. Maybe just a hair more of the red. Okay. And so I'm mixing fairly vertically. I mix my brush back and forth. I'm flipping my brush over to mix. And when I'm loading my brush, you can see right here that there's some load in here, about here. The tip's a little cleaner, the load is sitting here, and that my brush does not have paint more than halfway down it. I'm looking for a feeling. How does it feel? And I'm going to come in here. It's a little dark. I'm going to add a touch more white. Mix that color in. Touch more of the liquid. Again, yep, that's a better color. And I'm going to get this color in the background. I'm just trying to separate out some of this stuff. This one's a little bluer, so each time I'm coming to mix, I'm going to mix a little bit of a different color. I'm going to make that a little bluer, and I'm just going to paint background to foreground. This up here is darker, so I'm just going to go ahead and take my French ultramarine blue, the color I was using, and the red, and go ahead. Little bluer version. Why? Because it's in the background and blue colors recede. So although it's dark, I want it to recede. There's a little bit of a line in here. Not going to worry about detail right now. I'm just putting some of this stuff in, mostly just as sort of a spot where I can gauge things from. And I'm going to come in here and again go a little bluer. This blue, the cerulean, the fake cerulean, and this cad scarlet are nearly opposite on the wheel. Oops, that's way too much red. But I'm going to pull this blue in, and if I lean to the blue side, I'll have a gray. If I lean to the red side, I'll have a brown. So you'll be able to see that I can pull in a lot of different colors of grays and browns, just pulling in these two colors. A little bit more light. Remember, each time you mix, it gets darker, so I added a touch of white. And I'm going to come right down the side of this shape, and I'm just going to paint it in. It's probably a bit dark for you viewing this. I'll do my best so that you can see it. I'm going to go a little bit bluer for this part. So, rocks have planes, and this plane's facing a different direction than that plane. And just slightly, so let's just pull some of that over, and they're just slightly different planes, okay? And a little bit darker down in here in the bottom. Paint back up. This is a light spot, so I'm going to skip that, move on over, use the side of my brush. I'm going to paint this shape right there. Okay. Again, I'm not overly concerning myself if it's incorrect, as long as it still looks like a rock. I really just need the planes. Out on the front of this plane, this is lighter, and not too much lighter, but a little bit lighter. You can see that right there. It's sort of this value, and sure enough, it's about the right value. While I'm back there, normally I would try and keep a dark brush and a light brush. Let's see if I can do that. So I'm going to make this my light brush. And let's see, that's the right value in there. Of course, again, remember the camera didn't do what it should have. It probably made some of this too light and some of it too dark. So we're just going to try and do our best. Again, always, 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 you can come back in. We can make corrections later if we need to. When I mix my yellow in a very general way, I'm going to just pull a hair, that's too much, pull a hair of yellow into my white. Why? Because the sunlight tends to lean a little bit to the yellow side. This is a good thing for us to use. So again, this would be considered a detail. I normally wouldn't bring it in now. I just bring it in so you can see where I'm going with that. Okay, and I can see down here, I've got the faces of two other rocks down there. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull some light in on top of those surfaces. I'm going back to this brush that's slightly darker but not completely darker. I'm just fixing that a little bit. Okay. Alright, let's keep on moving. I want to try and move a little faster. I've kind of took my time and been moving slow for all of you, and I think it might be helpful. I guess you can just speed up the video if you need to pull through faster and come in and pull in some of the dark in here. I got a little bit too dark on that middle value, so again, I'm just remixing, mixing different colors, all in really similar values. Okay, trying to keep to one side or the other. Okay. And there's a little bit of breakup on the face of this rock, so I'm going to come across the top of this rock and just, while I'm over here with this color, just sort of act like there's little cracks and crevices in there. Again, normally I would do this at the end, but I sort of wanted you to see how it is as we're going along, so that you can understand what's happening. I normally also wouldn't put this crevasse in here or this little rock thing, but I'm going to do that right now. For people who are wondering how I'm painting and using the brushes, I'm mixing. I'm getting a color I like. I am moving it around. I'm holding my brush fairly vertical, sort of mixing back and forth, pulling the brush towards myself. I'm not pushing. When I touch the canvas, I'm touching it to check the color before I paint with it. If it's not the color I want, I change the color. I'm mixing again back and forth. Again, I'm only loading up the front of the brush. I check my color. Do I like that color? Seems to be working for me okay. I think it could use a little more French ultramarine blue. It's probably hard for you to see the color. I noticed that on the videos. And I'm going to come in here a little more Cad Scarlet. So sort of like when I was doing the greens, I just used yellow and blue. Now I'm just using blue and red. Okay? And I'm going to just hit these shapes in here. And each time I paint them, I'm going to add, just barely touch that color and just change it ever so slightly. Touch, change it. Okay? Just so they don't look the same and looks browner, and push it a little bit. Notice I'm going across. So if the paint is not going on easily for you, do not push harder. Push lighter. Lighter touch. You can always come back and make a second pass. One of the mistakes people do is that when the paint isn't going on, I said I would talk about brush strokes in here. So when the paint isn't going on, they push. They push like this and they go like this and they dump all their paint, and then they got this big blob of paint here and nothing down here. And then they're like, oh, it got too mushy. Okay? You have to, you're painting basically with pretty much with the tip of your brush. You want to load that tip. You want to just bring it sort of with an even pressure on top. What you're going to find is I'm going to get that off of there. You're going to find that when you're up here, when you first start your stroke, you're probably putting very light pressure on. And as you come down to get more paint off, you're probably going to drop it down. Not drop it down, but bring a little more pressure onto your brush. Please, you're always stroking. Stroke just as you would with any tool that you like. Don't dab. When you do this to your brush, you destroy this tip and it ceases to function for you. So please, no dabbing. If you need a small stroke, make a small stroke. If it's a small stroke, I'm right on this one, small stroke. You can do small stroke, okay? But if you push too hard and you start trying to force the paint onto the surface, that is when you wreck your brushes, and that's when you get frustrated because you end up with a whole lot of paint in one spot and none in another. So light. These are all really light touches. I think it took me, well, I talk about the fact that this is what my instructors were looking for when I was painting in school, and I talk about the fact that it probably took me 5 years from the time I started painting, through practice, to realize, oh, I'm pushing too hard. I need to lighten up. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just lightening up. So I can put layer over layer if I need to. I can put on another 2 or 3 layers of paint, and it should all just come together and work fine for me. Okay? All right. I'm going to put some other grays in here. I'm going to pick up the pace, I think, unless I see something I need to talk about. So in general, I'm just trying to put a little bit of light on these faces towards us, and not too much up in here. And then, like I said, in general, I wouldn't do this right now, but I'm going to take my light brush that has white with a touch of yellow on it, and I'm going to come back in here and hit these little light areas so you can kind of see where I am. I'm not too worried if they're not exactly right. They just need to look like rocks. So a couple of tricks to rocks are they have a light area, maybe something a little less light. They're kind of square. Maybe the light isn't continuous. It might sort of see off the front of something. Let me fix that. Okay. And then on this one, I'm going to go back to that French ultramarine blue, that cad scarlet, that same 2 colors I drew in with, and I'm going to come right back into this little crevasse in here and just restate it. It kind of got lost, so I'm just making it darker. Again, I'm just touching the surface to bring that little crevasse in and make that little area darker. I don't want it to look too busy. I don't want it to get so busy that it's impossible to tell what we're doing. I also don't want to get caught in detail right now when I'm just trying to talk about painting rock, okay? So I'm going to come over here. As you can see, I already got the dark side in here. So I'm going to go ahead. I know this is overexposed. So I'm going to go ahead and make it light. I'm using white mixed in with those colors, and a little bit of that yellow. So there's my light. I kind of bent it down too much. I see that, so I'm going to lift this up a little bit, give us a little less of the surface. Remember that? Less of the surface makes it feel a little flatter. Put a little bit of that light out there. And again, I'm going to come in just like I did before. I'll take this light brush, kind of keep throw in the little bit of detail As I said, I don't usually do this along the way, but I'm just trying to keep you from getting lost. So, and I thought that would be helpful. There's another rock in here, and again, it's just got a little light surface on it. Going to keep coming down. This is this big surface here. So, I notice this is a little greener. Yeah, I want it greener. I'll take a touch of yellow, take a touch of the blue, use more white, touch the surface. That's greener. You probably can't tell it's greener. It's just a color, you know. It's a gray color. Remember, when I'm mixing, I'm keeping to the blue side or the cool side. That makes it a gray. There's this one. There's a light back there. It's a little bit lighter, so a little more white, a little more yellow. Painting pretty directly. Just a touch. I'm going to use the middle brush to do this side of that rock behind us. I can always come back in and make it lighter. I'm also going to get this one in. So what happens down here is light reflects back up into the bottom of this. So we have cast shadows. Those are shadows that well, we don't have a lot of cast shadow here. But it's shadow that sort of casts onto the other surface. But what we have down in here is, as this faces the ground, is it just reflects back up into the rock. So rocks sit in the ground. They don't sit on the surface. They sit in the ground. They're kind of heavy, and you tend to not want them make them look like they're floating. So I'm going to come down in here. There's some other light rocks in here. There's some in the shadow too. I'm just going to give you some shapes down in here. Tell you that there's other stuff going on down in here. And then this actually goes back darker. Why? Because this bottom surface rotates away from the ground. And we do have a little bit of shape in there. This is grass. This is our next rock. Come back and put the grass on in a minute. Let me see if I can just pick up my pace here and get these covered. So again, a little bit of to the yellow side up here. I think too much yellow is going to look wrong, so I'm going to just touch my Cad Scarlet barely. Check my color, see if it's interesting. It's a little browner, it's a little closer to us. It doesn't look that way in the photograph, but I know in the photograph it's washed out. So I'm going to just go ahead and pull some of the color in there. I'll come back and get this middle brush. So notice I'm handling 3 values. Middle value, dark value, light value. Going to get this shape, going to get this shape down in here. Going to get this shape. Again, rocks are like blocks. They have corners, so they'll have sharp edges where they shift in their value pretty rapidly. If I want to make this lighter down here, because it is a little bit lighter, I can come back in here and just paint very gently over the top of that color and lighten that up. Okay, so I can sort of pull those in, and I can pull a little more light down in here. Okay. A little bit. I'm going to finish these. Okay, so I pushed a little harder because there was no paint on there at all. I'm going to not push quite so hard so I can get that paint on. And I'm going to take a little pause because there's noise outside and it's probably carrying into here. So let me see if I can get this shape a little bit worked out. And again, sort of pull in to this area. It's a little dark. I'm going to come in some of the undersides of these, and I'm going to pull in this light. Okay. And don't want it to be too light, so notice how I'm gripping the brush. I got this overhand thing going on. I'm painting from a distance away. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on here. I'm trying to just get the shapes in. I notice there's a little bit of a dark shape in here. I notice there's a little bit of some dark shapes in here, especially as this curves around. So, you know, those little splits on the rock and stuff, we can sort of paint those in and give you a little more texture and idea of what's happening. Okay, so I got a little bit under here, and then I realized my battery had died. I'm going to come in right now and put in some of this ground so you can see what's going on there. I'm going to use a flat again. Sorry, I know I rotated my head, and it's hard to hear me when I rotate my head. I'm going to use a flat brush again, one that's squared off. I'm going to use little bit of yellow ochre plus white. And just to get that color, I'm going to dab. That's too much, so I'm going to get that off my brush. Add a little bit of the Cad Scarlet in there. And I'm just going to come in here above this, and I'm going to use the side of the brush and sort of bring up. So it's really flat in there. I'm going to bring it really flat so it looks flat. There's a rock here, so I'm going to stop around that rock. And I'm going to just go ahead and make this flat and then bring up the edge and leave some of the dark behind. If I don't leave the dark behind it, it won't have the sense of depth that I want it to have. So I'm just using the tip of the brush. Again, we were talking about strokes a little bit. And I'm just using the side of the brush. I'm lifting. Where the ground is flat, I am making the ground flat. And one more time, I'm doing my darndest to not use the same color every single time. So we want it a little oranger, we want it a little yellower, maybe a little whiter. Just let it have some variation. And I'm doing this right now so that we can kind of figure out what's going on with these rocks in here, okay? There's a little bit of stuff in here. I'm not going to go above this light area that I haven't painted yet. I'm just sort of saying, oh, there's some light in here, and these are a little bit redder. There's some in here. Okay, and back in here there's a little bit of green in, which is more rock. Beyond here, I'm going to put a little bit of this and some green. Okay, these are some green plants in here. So I've got this yellow ochre with a touch of that Cad Scarlet in it. I'm going to just go ahead and grab some of the cerulean blue, and again a little more yellow ochre, and I'm going to come in here, right up here, and go, oh yeah, that looks like a good color. Okay, because there's some plants in here. That's why I left that spot, so that we could put those plants in there. And again, each time I touch my palette, I'm going to change the color up a little bit so they aren't all the same. I'm going to bring this back down. Aha! We can sort of see how it comes over the rock here, this plant, whatever it is. sort of comes in here. And one more time, we're grouping things together. So we want to group them. Okay, it comes over the rock here. I sort of misshape the rock, so I'm going to paint back into it. There's a little bit down in here. And there's some green stuff kind of up and over some of this over here. So just throw some in. Doesn't matter if it's exact. Of course not. It didn't grow this way the same way it grew last year. So I took this photograph, I looked it up 6 years ago or something. So I'm sure it doesn't look like that anymore at all anyway. Okay, I got the green in, I got that in. I'm going to just paint really quickly right now. Try to paint without talking. Imagine that. And see if I can get this covered. Okay, a little bit of light. Add some yellow to it. It's too white. Keep it brief. This is planes are facing up. The plane that faces up the most is going to be the lightest plane. Oops. Oh, that's the right brush. Planes that are facing to the side, not quite as light. Planes that are sort of underneath things might not be quite as light as other planes. This is sitting down under some plants and it's got some stuff across it, as is this. It's got a little bit of dark in there. And this is a little greener. So I'm coming back, going darker under here, darker down low. Then I'm going to come back into this rock. I'm going to bring that middle value in on the side over here. Yes, I see that the shapes aren't exactly right. I'm not super worried about it. And this comes up a little bit more. And down in between these, they'll sort of reflect off of one another, and that's kind of when you get this reddish tinge in there. I see a reddish tinge in here, and down in here I see something that looks a little bluer, so I just go ahead and grab that little bluer, change out the color a little bit. Same thing up in here. I see this looks a little bluer. Let's just bring some color in there. This is almost perfect cerulean blue, and look how I'm holding the brush. I'm holding it closer down, so I have a little bit smaller range, but I'm just aiming to put a little bit of color in a couple spots. If it gets too colorful, like I kind of did there, I'll just come back with this gray I already made right over the top. Okay. I can see there's a little bit of light on there. Okay. There's a couple other little things in here. Of course, this is one of those things where you can start playing with the detail. Spend a lot of time playing with the details. I think this is a little too much light there. Okay, and right in here, it's kind of dark. I'm going to come back with the darker brush. Go ahead and bring this on down. Just fill up the space. We're going to bring grasses back on top here. Okay. I'm going to take that middle value brush. We're going to sort of cut it back in under this rock here. Remember the orange thing again? It's sort of reflecting off the ground. So kind of bring in that orange thing. Again, if you don't like it, you can change it later. This is not a nothing. You can change them all later. Okay. I think, and this is just me, there's a little bit of light down in here. And I see a little bit of light out in here. I don't want to get too caught in that. I do think that I need to come a little bit whiter on top. So especially right in here. If it doesn't go on, if you have too much paint on there, wait for it to dry and come back and put your little bits of light on top. One of the really fun things is that when everything is dry, it's really easy to come in and put light on top. Okay, rocks sit down in the ground, so we have the little dark edges underneath all of them. And then there are just little bits of light on top. Now there's a lot of little rocks in here. We don't want to put that many in there. If we do, it's going to look too busy. So let's just put some light in there, like there's a rock in there. Let it go behind that. There's some over here. Okay. And they're just sort of in the rock and around the bushes. So I'm not going to overthink their surfaces. I'm just going to go ahead and bring a little bit of light on top. Just bring some light on top. Some of those, again, did you see what I did there? I'll do it one more time. I came in with the white, I used the corner of my brush, and I put a little more pressure on there, so put more paint on the surface. Okay? Let's get some of this down in here. I think there's a little bit of busyness in here. So I'm just using my brush, barely touching again. A little bit of busyness in here. Got a little too light. I'm just going to come back and bring it back not so light. So it breaks up that edge. So although they're blocks and they're all pretty much different planes, which so upward facing planes, or the plane towards the light is going to be the lightest, even though that's what's happening, a lot of these edges are a little coarse, right? They didn't break just perfectly. It's not like a marble farm or something. They're where they're pulling marble out of the ground and they're cutting the blocks. Okay, I'm going to come in. I made this brush green. I was just moving along pretty quickly, so it ended up being a green brush. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the green in. There's just some bushes around here, and I'm using the corner, sort of the side of the brush. I'm not just pulling things in here, and I'm using just the edge of the brush. You can see I'm not trying to do it flat. Down in here it's darker. I'll just make a darker blue-green. Okay. There's some other stuff growing in here. Who knows? Some plants. Okay. And okay, let's go ahead, and I had to grab another brush for my weeds. Here we go. Okay, now that all the paint's on and we've got everything in place, now I can come in here right on the back side of this. I think I just painted on the iPad. And just right over the top. I'm using, again, the kind of the corner of the brush. And I'm going to just pretend there's weeds growing up. Oops. I don't know what that is. And I'm just pulling up from the bottom, using the side, making sure there's a nice dark bottom or something in there, so that when I pull the weeds over, you get a sense of depth. Here, I don't need a sense of depth. This is very flat, so I'm just going to use a little bit of white. You can see it in there. And I'm just going to keep this really flat. This brush is losing a hair. It's a little bit white in there, so let's just go ahead and paint that flat. Again, remember, you want to paint what direction? You're either going to paint the direction of the object, or you're going to paint it either along the plane or across the plane. So right now we're painting along the plane. When I put the weeds in, I'm painting along the plane. The weeds grow up, right? Try to keep them unregular, so they start to look regular. Do something. Change them. Make a couple different ones, or pull them, group these ones together, and then just, even if they're there, don't put them in. If they start looking too regular, they look wrong. If you got them too long, let's say they're too long back in here, just take your brush, bring them back down. Paint back down in, change them. Okay? You don't have to leave it. You have to make the painting read. It doesn't have to look like the photograph. It has to read. It has to look like what it was meant to be, which is rocks in up on the well, it's supposed to be a pile of rocks. I guess it looks like there's a little bit of a trail back in there. I can give you a little more light down in there so that you will feel like there's a reason to go back there, even though it doesn't show up in the picture. Okay, let's just give you a little more light. Let's say, yep, there's something back there, folks. I want you to go back and visit. Okay, so I'm giving you a little more light back in there. I'm going to come back in and fix this up here that's gotten a little too light. And then right there, I'm going to bring the white back on top. Right here. And right around that rock, I'm going to bring this dark back in here, so it defines the rock. Okay. What else do I need to do? I'm making this a little darker. Why am I doing that? I'm trying to separate this shape from those shapes. Okay, again, photograph, painting, they're not the same. We're not about copying, we're about learning how to separate and make it feel like it's something that you would want to visit. Okay, I went a little too far that way, so I'm going to come back in, a little bluer. Okay, but all I did was come in here and strengthen the lines and sort of separate this shape from that. I think that looks like it's gotten a little busy, so I'm going to kind of take it down and make it less so. Okay? There's a reason for that. It gets too busy, it sort of detracts from other things we're doing. See, there's a little bit of other busyness on some of these rocks, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, oh look, there's a little bit of busyness on some of the other rocks. Alright, I know there's one more thing to do, and again, if you put detail in, try not to make it too regular. Nature is not regular. Nature has a lot of variation. And I'm going to pull a little more of the orange color in here. So this is what I like about rocks. I like the fact that you can take that cad, scarlet, And just go ahead and throw that color in there, sort of warm up those rocks and sort of make them interesting and feel a little more welcoming and stuff, even if it's you don't see it. When you're out on the trail or you're out somewhere and you're making these observations, just make the observations. Just go, oh, I noticed that that rock is a little greener in there. And I don't want everything to look completely violet. I think the violet gets a little overdone. But it's a good start for your painting. So I'm going to do like 2 more things here. Again, like all paintings, I know this is meant to be a demo, and then, you know, I kind of get going and then I don't want to stop. But I'm just trying to change this from being so violet. Just seemed like it was a little too violet. And this edge feels a little too square. So let's come back in here. Notice what I did. I went ahead and put some dark on. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take that middle value brush and sort of say, oh, let's just take some of that out again. Sort of put some on, take some out. I'm just lightly going over the surface. I know this has a little more broken surface, so let's break it up a little bit. Okay. And then last, but probably not least, if you're looking to have something a little more of a completed painting, I think the only thing you really need to do is take some of your green, bring a little bit of your cad yellow pale into your green with some white, and come back in, lighten it up, and just come back in here and hit just some of the tops of these. I think they could be a little yellower. Oh, there we go. That's a nicer color. And bring some of this light in. These weeds are not even, so we don't want them to look like a halo, which I kind of did. I sort of made them even like a halo, so white. I'm working on this. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and again take my dark color. So remember, we have 5 brushes. We have green, yellow, and the 3 values of the rocks. I'm going to take my light brush. I'm just going to come back in. My dark brush, and just paint back in here. Okay, look, I get more paint in, get the shape in there, paint in, break it up a little bit, just painting over it. Again, one more thing, if you can't, if that's just too messy for you, wait, do it later, okay? You can do it later. Wait for it to dry, come back, okay? All right, see a little bit of green up in here. Whoops, that is a light green. Sometimes you should stop. Okay, all right. That was just a little too much, so again, we're going to paint right back into that. And I'm going to put a little more light on that rock. I'm going to stand back, I'm going to check it, and I'm going to check the light on these things, make sure I'm pretty happy with it. Notice how I've sort of warmed up some of that light. I'm going to just double check it really quick, make sure it looks good. So again, I'm squinting as I go. I'm sort of trying to pay attention to where I'm seeing light. Okay, I think I stopped it and restarted it. The only cleanup I have is right here. I think this is a little too big. And I don't know. Let's see if we can put a little bit of light beyond there. See if it works. Yeah, make us feel like we can, again, get in there. All done. All right, keep painting. Enjoy painting rocks. They're fun. You can add a lot of colors on them. Enjoy the process.